Somewhere over occupied France, in the spring of 1943, a B-17 Flying Fortress named Lucky Lady was dying. The pilot's voice cut through the interference, calm, resigned, almost peaceful. "This is Baker 27. We're going down. Tell my wife I—" Then nothing, just the hiss of dead air and the ghost of a transmission that would never reach home. In the operations room at RAF Alconbury, a young intelligence officer marked another red X on the mission board. It was the 11th bomber lost that week. 11 crews, 77 men, gone. It wasn't the enemy that doomed them. It was the weight of their own ambition. The Americans had promised to bomb Germany into submission, to strike the factories, the refineries, the submarine pens that fed Hitler's war machine. But there was a problem nobody had solved. To reach those targets, the bombers had to fly deep into enemy territory, hundreds of miles beyond the range of any fighter escort. The P-47 Thunderbolts and P-38 Lightnings could protect them over the coast, maybe as far as the German border. After that, the bombers were alone, and the Luftwaffe was waiting. German fighter pilots had learned something the Americans didn't want to admit. The B-17 Flying Fortress, despite its fearsome name and bristling machine guns, had a fatal weakness. Most of its defensive firepower pointed sideways or backward. Attack from the front, and a bomber crew had maybe 2 or 3 seconds to react before 20mm cannon shells ripped through the cockpit, killing both pilots instantly. No evasive maneuvers, no second chances, just physics and geometry and sudden, violent death. The Americans called those deep penetration raids running the gauntlet. Crews didn't talk much before those missions. They smoked cigarettes, wrote letters they hoped wouldn't become last letters, and tried not to think about the statistics. Command needed 25 missions to complete a combat tour. But the math was brutal. At current loss rates, half the crews would never make it past 15. The air war looked unsustainable. Something had to change. Before we go further, if you're watching this from the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, or anywhere else in the world, drop a comment below and let us know. These stories connect us across borders and generations. And hit that subscribe button for Echoes of London, because what happens next changed aerial warfare forever. Though not in the way anyone expected. In Washington, generals studied casualty reports and argued about strategy. Cancel the daylight raids entirely? Switch to night bombing like the British? Pull back until long-range fighters were ready? But at Wright Field in Ohio, a small team of engineers had a different idea. It was radical, maybe even reckless. If American fighters couldn't escort the bombers all the way to Germany and back, what if they didn't need to? What if a bomber could protect itself and protect the others around it? The concept was simple. Take a B-17 Flying Fortress and transform it into a flying gun platform. Strip out everything that didn't shoot bullets. Remove the bomb racks, the bomb sight, the whole reason bombers existed in the first place. Use that weight allowance for more ammunition, more armor plating, more turrets. Turn one aircraft into a bodyguard that could keep pace with the formation, absorb enemy attacks, and shoot back from every angle at once. They called it a destroyer escort concept, naval terminology for an aerial problem. Some officers thought it was brilliant, others thought it was insane. But desperate times bred desperate innovation, and in early 1943, the 8th Air Force was drowning in desperation. The numbers told the story. On the raid to Schweinfurt that August, the Americans would lose 60 bombers in a single day, 600 men killed, wounded, or captured. The losses were so catastrophic that deep penetration raids would be suspended for months. Bomber crews whispered a dark joke in the barracks. The Luftwaffe doesn't need to shoot us all down. They just need to shoot down enough of us. But back in the winter and spring of 1943, before Schweinfurt became a byword for disaster, there was still hope, still belief that American engineering and American courage could solve any problem. At a workshop in Tulsa, Oklahoma, engineers began the transformation. They selected a standard B-17F, tail number 425732, and started cutting. The bomb bay, designed to carry 6,000 pounds of high explosives, was stripped bare. In its place went racks of ammunition cans, enough 50 caliber rounds to fire continuously for over an hour. Additional turrets sprouted from the fuselage like metallic mushrooms. A second dorsal turret went in behind the first. Extra waist guns were mounted, and most importantly, a new Bendix chin turret was installed under the nose, 2 forward-firing 50 caliber Brownings that could finally answer those head-on attacks. When the modifications were complete, the aircraft bristled with 16 machine guns. 16. The standard B-17 carried 13, and crews already complained about ammunition weight. This variant carried 40% more firepower and 3 times the ammunition load. The engineers stepped back and admired their work. Then they realized what they'd created. The modified bomber weighed over 10,000 pounds more than a standard B-17. At altitude, trying to keep pace with a formation, it would burn fuel at a catastrophic rate. The engines would strain, possibly overheat. Maneuverability would suffer. And if anything went wrong, if it had to drop out of formation for any reason, all that firepower wouldn't matter. A lone bomber, no matter how heavily armed, was still a dead bomber. But orders were orders, and war didn't wait for perfect solutions. The designation came through official channels, YB-40. The Y stood for prototype, experimental, unproven. The Air Force ordered 13 conversions and assigned crews specially trained in gunnery. These wouldn't be regular bomber crews. These would be aerial gunfighters, men who lived to shoot, not to drop bombs. The YB-40 program was born. The Flying Fortress had become the Flying Destroyer. And somewhere in England, a 26-year-old pilot named James Hartwell was about to receive orders that would test whether American innovation could outsmart German tactics, or whether some problems couldn't be solved by adding more guns. The gauntlet was waiting. The experiment was ready. What could possibly go wrong? Captain James Hartwell didn't look like a man about to make aviation history. He looked tired. 26 years old, 200 combat hours over Europe, and a distinguished flying cross pinned to his uniform for a mission where he'd nursed a crippled B-17 home, with 1 engine dead and half the crew wounded. He'd seen friends die. He'd watched bombers disintegrate in midair, scattering men and metal across the sky like confetti at a funeral. He knew exactly how thin the line was between coming home and becoming a statistic. So, when the group commander called him into the briefing room at RAF Alconbury on a gray morning in May 1943, Hartwell expected another rough mission, another penetration into Germany, another roll of the dice. What he didn't expect was the photograph. The colonel slid it across the table, a B-17, but wrong somehow. Too many bumps, too many gun barrels pointing in too many directions. It looked like someone had taken a flying fortress and covered it in porcupine quills made of steel. "You'll fly this one," the colonel said. Not a question, not a request. Hartwell studied the photo, counted the turrets, tried to imagine the weight. "Sir, what exactly is this?" "YB-40, escort gunship, 1650s. Your job is to protect the formation, stay with the bombers, draw fire, shoot down anything that gets close." The colonel leaned back. "Some very smart people in Washington think this could change the war." Hartwell didn't ask what the colonel thought. Officers learned quickly that what mattered wasn't whether an idea was good. It was whether it came from someone with enough stars on their collar. "When do we start?" Hartwell asked. "Your bird arrives tomorrow. You've got 1 week to train your crew. First combat sortie is May 29th, St. Nazaire." The meeting was over. Hartwell stood, saluted, walked out into the perpetual drizzle of an English spring, and wondered if he'd just volunteered for a suicide mission. By the time the YB-40 arrived at Alconbury, word had spread through the base. Mechanics abandoned their posts to watch it taxi in. Pilots stood outside the operations building, smoking and gawking. Ground crew whistled and made jokes, but their eyes betrayed something else: nervousness, maybe even fear. The aircraft looked like violence given form. Every surface seemed to sprout a gun barrel. The new chin turret under the nose gave it an aggressive, almost predatory appearance. Someone had already painted a name on the fuselage: Hedgehog. Ugly, heavy, covered in spikes. The name fit. Hartwell's crew assembled on the hardstand. 10 men instead of the usual 10. Extra gunners to man the additional positions. The bombardier was gone. No bombs meant no need for a bombardier. In his place, another man trained to kill. The co-pilot, Lieutenant Danny Reeves, circled the aircraft slowly, touching turrets, counting ammunition feed chutes. He was 22, baby-faced, from Iowa. He'd flown 15 missions and still hadn't lost his Midwestern optimism. "Skipper," Reeves called out, "this thing's got more firepower than a Navy destroyer." "Yeah," Hartwell replied, "and about the same maneuverability." The chief mechanic approached, a grizzled sergeant named Kozlowski, who'd been maintaining aircraft since biplanes were cutting edge. He handed Hartwell a clipboard thick with technical specifications and warnings. "Captain, I need you to understand something," Kozlowski said quietly. "This bird weighs 64,000 pounds fully loaded. A regular fort weighs 54,000. That's 10,000 pounds of guns and ammunition you're hauling. The engines are stock, same Wright Cyclones as every other B-17F. They're not built for this weight. Can she fly? She'll fly. Question is whether she can keep up once the others drop their bombs and lighten their load." Kozlowski glanced at the aircraft. "You'll be burning fuel trying to maintain formation speed. And if you fall behind..." He didn't need to finish. Everyone knew what happened to stragglers. Hartwell nodded. "We'll make her work." For the next week, the crew trained obsessively. They practiced gunnery patterns, worked out firing solutions for simultaneous engagements, rehearsed ammunition management. The tail gunner, a quiet farm boy from Montana named Cooper, could field strip and reassemble his twin 50s blindfolded. The waist gunners developed a rhythm, coordinating fire to create overlapping fields without shooting each other's turrets off. They ran mock intercepts with ground controllers, calling out hypothetical German fighter approaches. "Bandits, 12 o'clock high, 3 contacts, diving fast." And the crew would swivel turrets, calculate lead, imagine the tracers stitching across the sky. At night, in the barracks, Reeves asked the question nobody wanted to voice. "You think this'll actually work?" Hartwell was lying on his bunk, hands behind his head, staring at the ceiling. "I think some engineer in Ohio did math that says it should work. And I think we're going to find out if the math was right. And if it wasn't, then we'll be the ones who prove it wrong. Either way, we're making history." Hartwell turned his head, met Reeves's eyes. "You scared?" "Terrified." "Good. Scared keeps you sharp. It's the guys who think they're invincible who get killed." The day before their first mission, Hartwell climbed into Hedgehog alone. He sat in the pilot's seat, hands on the yoke, and tried to feel the aircraft. Every plane had a personality. Some were forgiving, gentle. Others were temperamental, demanding. This one felt heavy, ponderous, like it was already tired before takeoff. He thought about all those lost crews, the red X's on the mission board, the empty bunks, the letters home that started with, "We regret to inform you." Maybe this would work. Maybe 16 guns and enough ammunition to light up the sky would finally tip the balance. Maybe American firepower could overwhelm German tactics. Or maybe this was just another desperate gamble in a war that seemed to devour desperate gamblers. The briefing for the St. Nazaire mission came at 0400 hours. Hartwell's crew filed in with 200 other men, pilots, co-pilots, navigators, bombardiers, gunners. The room smelled of coffee, cigarette smoke, and anxiety. The intelligence officer pulled back the curtain covering the mission map. A collective groan rippled through the room. Saint-Nazaire. The submarine pens on the French coast. Heavy flak, Luftwaffe fighters stationed nearby. Not the worst target they'd hit, but far from easy. "Gentlemen," the colonel began, "you'll note we have a special addition to today's formation. The YB-40 escort gunship will fly with the lead squadron. Its mission is defensive, to protect the formation from fighter attack. Let them draw fire. Let them do their job." Heads turned. Eyes found Hartwell and his crew. Someone in the back muttered, "Rather them than me." Hartwell didn't react. He studied the map, memorized the route, calculated fuel consumption and timing. When the briefing ended, crews scattered to their aircraft. On the hard stand, Hedgehog waited. Ground crew made final checks. Ammunition cans were loaded, 2,600 rounds per gun, 41,600 rounds total, nearly 3 tons of bullets. Hartwell walked around the aircraft one last time, touching the cold aluminum, feeling the rivets under his fingertips. This was it. The moment when theory became reality, when engineering met combat. The engines coughed, sputtered, roared to life. One by one, 4 Wright Cyclones spun up to full power. The propellers became silver discs in the pre-dawn darkness. Reeves leaned over from the co-pilot's seat. "Ready, skipper?" Hartwell pushed the throttles forward. The bomber lurched, began rolling, picked up speed with agonizing slowness. The runway lights blurred past. The nose lifted. The wheels left the ground. Hedgehog was airborne. The flying destroyer was going to war. And somewhere over the channel, German radar operators were watching their scopes, counting contacts. Scrambling fighters! The gauntlet was open. The experiment had begun. The formation climbed through layers of gray cloud like a school of metal fish, ascending through murky water. Hartwell held Hedgehog steady in the lead position, throttles pushed almost to the stops just to maintain speed. Even empty of bombs, the other B-17s seemed to float effortlessly, while his overweight gunship clawed for altitude. The engines roared, straining, temperature gauges creeping toward the red. Behind him, the flight engineer called out numbers. Fuel consumption already running 20% higher than planned. They crossed the English coast at Euro 6:47 hours. Below, the white cliffs dissolved into the steel-gray channel. Ahead, somewhere beyond the horizon, France waited. And beyond France, the submarine pens at Saint-Nazaire, massive concrete structures that could withstand anything except a direct hit from 6,000 pounds of high explosives, which Hedgehog wasn't carrying. The radio crackled. "All aircraft, this is Ragtime Leader. We're crossing the coast in 5 minutes. Expect company over Brest. Gunners, stay alert. Escorts will break off at the French border." Hartwell glanced left and right. 4 P-47. Thunderbolts rode shotgun, their stubby fuselages and massive radial engines somehow reassuring. But everyone knew the math. The P-47s had maybe another 15 minutes before they'd have to turn back, their fuel running low. After that, the bombers would be alone. Except they wouldn't be completely alone. Not this time. This time, they had Hedgehog. The coast of France appeared, a dark smudge that grew into beaches. Then cliffs. Then the patchwork of occupied farmland. The P-47s waggled their wings and peeled away, diving back toward England. The bomber stream pushed deeper into enemy territory. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. Just the drone of engines and the thin whistle of wind through gun ports. Hartwell's hands were steady on the yoke, but his eyes never stopped moving, scanning, searching, waiting. Then Cooper's voice cut through the intercom, flat and emotionless. "Bandits, 6 o'clock high, 4 contacts, Focke-Wulfs." Hartwell keyed his mic. "All gunners, stand by, fire on my mark." Through the windscreen, he saw nothing but empty sky. But he trusted Cooper. The tail gunner had eyes like a hawk and nerves like steel cables. "They're positioning," Cooper reported, "splitting into pairs. Classic setup, one high, one low." The German pilots were smart. They'd learned this dance through blood and repetition. Attack the formation from multiple angles, divide the defensive fire, exploit the blind spots. The B-17 had plenty of guns, but it couldn't shoot everywhere at once, except Hedgehog could. 3 o'clock! The starboard waist gunner shouted. "Attacking now!" The first Focke-Wulf 190 came in fast, a gray blur against the clouds, wings sparkling with cannon fire. But this time, instead of a standard bomber with limited forward firepower, the German pilot found himself flying into a wall of tracers. The new chin turret opened up, twin 50s hammering, joined instantly by the dorsal turret, the cheek guns, the waist guns. 16 weapons firing in coordinated fury. The FW-190 staggered, pieces flying off its wing. Black smoke erupted from the engine cowling. The fighter rolled inverted and dropped away, trailing fire. "Splash one!" Reeves shouted, his voice cracking with adrenaline. For a moment, one crystalline moment of pure hope. It seemed like the experiment had worked. The flying destroyer had lived up to its name. Then the fuel gauges told a different story. Hartwell's eyes dropped to the instruments. They'd been in combat for maybe 90 seconds, and the fuel consumption was catastrophic. All that firing, all those turrets spinning, all that weight pushing against physics. The Wright Cyclone engines were drinking gasoline like dying men gulping water. The other bombers had reached the target. Bomb bay doors opened. The lead aircraft dropped their payloads, and suddenly they were 6,000 pounds lighter. They surged ahead, their engines no longer straining, their airspeeds increasing. Hedgehog, still carrying every ounce of ammunition and armor it had taken off with, began to fall behind. "Skipper," the flight engineer said quietly, "we're losing them." Hartwell pushed the throttles forward. The engines responded, but not enough. The laws of physics were immutable. Mass times velocity equals momentum. Weight equals drag. The numbers didn't lie, and the numbers said Hedgehog was too heavy to keep pace with bombers that had just dropped their ordnance. "How bad?" Hartwell asked. "At this rate, we'll be a mile behind the formation in 10 minutes, and we're burning fuel we can't afford to burn." Reeves stared out the windscreen at the shrinking bomber stream. "Boss, we need to decide. Do we try to catch up? Or do we conserve fuel and hope we make it home?" Before Hartwell could answer, Cooper's voice came through again, still flat, but with an edge underneath. "Bandits, 7 o'clock level, 2 contacts, Messerschmitts, and they've seen us." Of course they had. German fighter pilots weren't stupid. They'd learned to watch for stragglers the way sharks learn to watch for wounded fish. A lone bomber, no matter how many guns it carried, was still alone. The Me-109s circled, keeping their distance, assessing. They'd seen the FW-190 go down. They knew this wasn't a standard fort, but they also knew it was separated from the formation, and separated meant vulnerable. "All guns pick your targets," Hartwell ordered. "Make every round count. We don't have fuel to waste chasing these guys off." The first Messerschmitt attacked from 5 o'clock, diving slightly, staying in that awkward zone where only the waist guns could engage effectively. The gunners opened fire, tracers reaching out, but the 109 jinked and rolled, cannon shells walking up Hedgehog's fuselage. Metal shrieked. Something in the waist position exploded in sparks. The starboard waist gunner screamed, hit, but not dead. The radio operator scrambled to pull him away from his weapon, while the port waist gunner swiveled his twin 50s, trying to cover both positions. The second Messerschmitt came in from the opposite side, coordinated, professional. These weren't rookies. These were veteran pilots who'd survived months of combat by being smarter, faster, more patient than their targets. Hartwell threw Hedgehog into a banking turn. Not evasive maneuvering, because the overweight bomber couldn't truly maneuver, but enough to spoil the German's aim. Cannon shells passed beneath the belly, close enough to feel through the airframe. Cooper in the tail fired a long burst. Pieces flew off the attacking 109's tail section. The fighter broke away, smoking but still flying. "He's coming around again," Cooper reported. The intercom filled with overlapping voices. Damage reports, target calls, ammunition counts. The controlled chaos of aerial combat, where every second felt like an hour, and every decision could be the last. A hydraulic line burst, spraying fluid across the bomb bay. The ball turret gunner reported his traverse mechanism was damaged. He could only rotate 90 degrees. The dorsal turret was overheating, the barrel jackets glowing dull red. And still the Messerschmitts circled, probing, testing, looking for the kill. Hartwell checked the fuel gauges again. They were burning through reserve tanks. Even if they broke off now and ran for England, it would be close. Too close. "Where's the formation?" he asked the navigator. 30 miles ahead and climbing. We can't catch them, Skipper." Reeves met Hartwell's eyes. Neither man spoke, but the question hung between them. Do we run or do we fight? Before either could answer, a new voice cut through the radio. American, calm, almost bored. "Unidentified heavy bomber. This is knockout flight. We've got eyes on you and 2 bandits, coming in hot." Hartwell's head snapped up. He scanned the sky, searching, hoping, praying. There. 4 silver streaks, diving out of the high clouds, sunlight glinting off polished aluminum. P-47. Thunderbolts, American red, white, and blue markings bright as flags. The Messerschmitts saw them too. They broke off immediately, diving away, not willing to face fresh American fighters with altitude and energy advantage. The P-47s formed up alongside Hedgehog, close enough that Hartwell could see the lead pilot giving him a thumbs up. "Nice shooting down there," the Thunderbolt pilot radioed. "You boys need an escort home?" "Affirmative, knockout flight," Hartwell replied, his voice steady, despite his hands shaking on the yoke. "And thank you." "Our pleasure. Let's get you back to England." The flight home was long, tense, and quiet. The P-47s stayed close, shepherding the wounded bomber across the channel. Hedgehog burned the last of its reserve fuel, crossing the English coast, engines coughing, props windmilling on fumes. Hartwell brought it in on a straight approach, no fancy flying, just a controlled descent onto the runway at Alconbury. The wheels touched, the tail dropped, the brakes squealed. They were home. Hartwell climbed down from the cockpit, his flight suit soaked with sweat, his hands still trembling from adrenaline and exhaustion. The ground crew was already swarming over Hedgehog, counting bullet holes, assessing damage. Kozlowski, the chief mechanic, stood with his arms crossed, shaking his head slowly. The aircraft looked like it had flown through a metal storm, which, in a sense, it had. 127 bullet holes. One engine's cylinders cracked from overheating. Hydraulic system destroyed. Ball turret inoperable. Fuel tanks bone dry. And one waist gunner on his way to the base hospital with shrapnel wounds. The group commander appeared, walking across the hard stand with that distinctive officer's stride, purposeful, direct, expecting answers. "Captain Hartwell," he said. "Your assessment?" Hartwell looked at Hedgehog, at the turrets still pointing at empty sky, at the guns that had fired thousands of rounds, at the aircraft that had been built to protect others and instead needed protecting itself. He met the commander's eyes. "Sir," Hartwell said quietly, "it can't keep up." 3 words. A death sentence for the entire program. The commander nodded slowly. He'd probably known before asking, probably wanted to hear it confirmed by someone who'd actually flown the mission. "Elaborate." "The weight, sir. Once the other bombers drop their loads, we can't maintain formation speed. We fall behind. And a lone bomber, doesn't matter how many guns it has, is a dead bomber." Hartwell paused. "We got lucky today. The P-47s showed up. Next time, we might not be that lucky. How many enemy aircraft did you engage? 3 confirmed, maybe 4. We got 1, damaged another. And the formation you were protecting? Lost 2 aircraft to fighter attack, both before we engaged. The math was brutal and simple. The YB-40 had failed its primary mission. It couldn't protect the formation if it couldn't stay with the formation. Over the next 2 months, the story repeated itself with agonizing consistency. More YB-40s flew more missions. They shot down German fighters, officially credited with 5 kills, possibly more. But every single mission ended the same way. The gunships fell behind, became stragglers, needed rescue. 48 combat sorties, 5 kills, 1 YB-40 lost to German fighters. And every crew came back saying the same thing Hartwell had said: it can't keep up. By August 1943, the program was officially cancelled. The remaining YB-40s were stripped of their extra equipment and converted back to standard bombers. The flying destroyer experiment was over. Command filed the reports away. Classified. Lessons learned. Don't talk about it. The program was a failure. Except it wasn't. In a workshop at Wright Field, a team of engineers received the combat reports from every YB-40 mission. They read the crew debriefs, studied the gun camera footage, analyzed the damage patterns. And they noticed something interesting. The chin turret, those 2 forward-firing 50 caliber Brownings mounted under the nose, had performed flawlessly. Every single crew praised it. The German tactic of head-on attacks, which had slaughtered so many bombers, suddenly became far less effective. Fighters approaching from 12 o'clock high found themselves flying into concentrated defensive fire for the first time. The YB-40's fundamental concept was flawed, but one piece of it, one specific innovation, was brilliant. The engineers drafted a modification proposal for the next B-17 variant. The B-17G model, already in development, would incorporate a production version of the Bendix chin turret, standard equipment, every aircraft, no exceptions. The first B-17G rolled off the assembly line in September 1943. By the end of the war, Boeing, Douglas, and Lockheed would produce over 8,600 of them. Each one carried that chin turret. Each one could finally answer the head-on attacks. The statistics told the story. B-17F models, without the chin turret, suffered a 23% loss rate from frontal attacks. B-17G models, with the chin turret, reduced that to less than 7%, a 71% reduction in casualties. 23,000 crewmen came home alive because of that single modification. 23,000 men who might have died the same way Lucky Lady's crew died, shot through the cockpit before they could even react. The YB-40 fell behind, but its innovation flew ahead. In 1947, Captain James Hartwell, now Major Hartwell, decorated and retired, attended a War Department ceremony honoring bomber crews. During the reception, a young pilot approached him, fresh-faced, maybe 22, still wearing his new wings. "Sir," the young pilot said, "I heard you flew the YB-40s. Is that true?" Hartwell nodded. "I trained on B-17Gs," the kid continued. "The instructors told us the chin turret saved thousands of lives. They said it came from a failed program that nobody talks about." He paused. Was it worth it? Flying something that didn't work? Hartwell looked across the room at the crowd of veterans. Men who'd flown through hell and somehow survived. Men who'd come home because engineers learned from failure instead of hiding it. "Every bullet hole says yes," Hartwell replied. The young pilot frowned, confused. "That aircraft took 127 hits on its first combat mission," Hartwell explained. "We flew something experimental, something that didn't work the way it was supposed to. We proved what wouldn't work. And smart people used that information to build something that did work." He smiled slightly. "Innovation isn't about being right the first time. It's about learning fast enough that your mistakes save lives instead of costing them." "Did you know it wouldn't work?" We suspected. But suspicion isn't data. Someone had to find out for sure. The young pilot nodded slowly, processing. Thank you for your service, sir. Thank you for continuing the mission. Years later, historians would analyze the YB-40 program and file it under failed experiments. Military databases would list it as a canceled project. Academic papers would use it as an example of good intentions meeting hard reality. But in museums across America, B-17G flying fortresses sit on display, their chin turrets gleaming under carefully positioned lights. Visitors walk past, maybe pause to read the plaques, maybe imagine what it was like to fly one into combat. Most never learn about the YB-40, never hear about Captain Hartwell and his crew, never know that the turret they're looking at, the one that saved 23,000 lives, came from an aircraft that could barely keep up with its own formation. History remembers the victors. History celebrates the successes. But sometimes the failures built the victories. Sometimes falling behind means pushing forward. The YB-40 flew 48 missions and proved a concept didn't work. That's not failure. That's science. That's engineering. That's the messy, dangerous, necessary process of innovation in wartime. The flying destroyer died, but its lesson lived in every B-17G that crossed into German airspace, in every crew that came home, in every family that didn't receive a telegram beginning with, "We regret to inform you." The bomber that couldn't keep up taught engineers how to build bombers that could fight back. And in the brutal mathematics of aerial warfare, that made all the difference. If stories like this move you, stories of innovation born from failure, of experiments that changed the war even when they didn't work as planned, hit that like button and subscribe to Echoes of London. You help bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life. And let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? United Kingdom, United States, Canada, Germany? We're building a community of history enthusiasts from around the world, and your perspective matters. To the men who flew the YB-40, to Captain James Hartwell and crews who tested an aircraft that couldn't keep up but taught engineers how to save thousands of lives, we remember you. To the 23,000 crewmen who came home because someone learned from failure instead of hiding it, this is your story too. The flying destroyer fell behind, but its legacy flew ahead. And that's what makes the difference between failure and foundation.